Alright, so today we'll be looking at friction, which is a force that opposes motion between two surfaces that are in contact. Now, as you can see in this illustration, we have a person that is pushing a box towards the left, and there's a resistance towards his pushing action. That resistance is what is called friction. Now, that takes us to the next lesson, which is going to be on the types of friction. Now, the first type of friction is called static friction. Now, from the word static, it simply means that an object is not moving. So, static friction prevents the object from starting to move. Now, in this illustration, if you've pushed a very heavy object on the floor, you would notice that initially, when you start to push, it is difficult at first. That is because static friction is limiting your pushing action, trying to keep the object static. So the moment when you are able to overcome static friction, it becomes easy for you to continue to push that object along. That brings us to the next kind of friction, which is called the kinetic or the sliding friction, which opposes the object which is already in motion. So the moment where you overcame static friction, initially you observe a resistance which is called friction, static. Then when you started to move the object, kinetic friction will start to kick in and it will try to bring that object back to rest because friction opposes motion between two surfaces in contact. So kinetic friction will try to bring that object back to rest. One thing we've discovered is that static friction is greater than kinetic friction because initially you did the hardest part by trying to make that object start to move. So at that point where it is static, that is where you have the highest resistance. So when you were able to overcome that static friction, it became easier for you to push it along. So static friction is greater than kinetic friction. The next type of friction is called rolling friction, which occurs when objects are rolling. And we know that from this image, it will be easiest to push this object when it's on a roller. And that's because rolling friction is less when compared to sliding or kinetic friction. It is difficult when sliding an object on a floor. So, in this manner, static friction is greater than sliding friction, which is greater than rolling friction. Now, we'll look at the advantages of friction. Having learned that friction opposes motion, we could easily think that friction is all bad. But there are some benefits we enjoy from friction. Number one is walking. Now, for you to be able to walk, something has to happen. One of your foot has to be on the floor. In this case, this foot has to be on the floor so that your other foot would be free to move. Now, the moment where this foot is locked in place, what happens is that friction grips this foot in place, thus allowing the other foot, which I marked in blue, to move. And so, by doing this concurrently, when the one in blue comes down, friction grips it in place so that the other one, which I've marked in red, would be free to also move. So by doing this, by holding one of your foot on the floor per time, one foot per time, it prevents you from sliding because if one of your foot is not firmly held in place, the other will not be free to move as you will just slide. So friction enables you to walk. Another advantage of friction is that it helps you to hold objects. And when I'm holding an object like a pen, I hold it with a force. So friction would enable me to grip that object tightly so that even if an object were to act on it, let's say for example gravity tries to pull that object down away from me, friction which opposes motion would oppose that sliding motion and firmly hold that object in order to ensure it doesn't slip from my hand. A very good example also is when you are using a hammer to hit a nail into a piece of wood. Static friction would also hold that nail firmly in order to ensure that it doesn't slip out of the wood. Now, another advantage of friction is that it allows objects to move and to stop freely. Let me give an example of where it allows objects to move. Let's say, for example, we have the road, which I will mark in blue. This is the road, and then you have a tire on the road. Now we know that a tire moves in a clockwise direction. So when this tire moves in a clockwise direction, now remember friction occurs when two objects are in contact. So as these objects are in contact and the tire is rolling over the floor, according to Newton's law of motion, there will be an equal but opposite reaction from the road, which will in turn propel the tire forward. So as the tire is rolling, if there is no friction between it and the road to cause it to at least be firmly gripped, of which there would be a reaction from the road which will propel it forward, then the tire will just endlessly spin. So through the action of friction, it enables the tire to be effectively pushed across the road. Now, how then does friction enables a car to stop? When your brakes are applied, it converts your energy into heat energy, which slowly brings the car to a stop. So by friction, your car is able to move. Also by friction, your car is able to stop safely. Friction also makes writing possible because if not for friction between the tip of your pen and the piece of paper, then your piece of paper cannot have a firm your pen rather cannot have a firm grip upon the piece of paper because it will just slide if there's no friction to grip it. Next, we look at the disadvantages of friction. It causes wear and tear. Friction causes wear and tear in machine parts, especially machine parts that move since friction occurs between two surfaces in contact. And where there is constant motion, definitely there will be friction. And occasionally it causes wear and tear, whereby as a machine move, especially over each other, like your gears, the teeth of your gears can begin to grind or break, thus causing the wear and tear of your machine. It also produces unwanted heat. For example, if you rub both of your palms against each other concurrently, you begin to feel heat. Same thing applies to your machines that move or slide against each other, like I gave an example of your gears. It will cause unnecessary heat. And by doing this, it reduces the efficiency of machines, of engines, because now your machine has to spend your energy to first of all overcome friction before it begins to do actual useful work. So by this, it also opposes smooth motion because definitely friction is an opposition to motion. So this causes a big problem. So that's why we go on to the next part, which is how to reduce friction. The first one is by lubrication. By lubrication. Now, when we talk about lubrication, what do we mean? We apply lubricants such as oil, such as grease. Now, what do lubricants do? Now, lubricants enable objects to slide against each other. We've noticed that it is difficult to slide an object across the floor. So when you apply a lubricant, what happens is that it enables these objects to slide against each other as a lubricant is usually slippery. Now, the other way of reducing friction is by streamlining it. Now, what happens in streamlining? In streamlining, you make the object smooth so that air, in this case, for example, our airplanes, our cars, could be streamlined so that instead of having a block design, let's say if your car is in a block design, you have every atom of air hitting on it. And so that means you're going to experience great action of friction. But If we were to streamline it, as in this case here, instead of air hitting every part of it, some of it will flow around it, thus reducing the opposition that we have from air. So in streamlining, it makes things smooth so that the air in this case can move around it. Now ball bearings are in this case like this. So instead of objects sliding around, it helps the objects to roll. So instead of the objects sliding against each other, you put them in a ball bearing so that they are able to roll. And we know that it is easier to move objects that roll than objects that slide. And so since ball bearings reduce contact between the objects and prevent sliding, instead helps them to roll, it is reducing friction and thus making it easier for these objects to move seamlessly. Then lastly, polishing the surfaces. Polishing a surface makes it smooth. And we know that the rougher a surface, the higher the friction, because friction occurs greatly in surfaces that are rough. It is less in surfaces that are smooth. And that's why, for example, in the first slide, let's go back to the first slide. In the first slide, where an object is being pushed, between a wet floor and the dry ground, which would it be easier for you to push this object across? Definitely, it's going to be the wet ground because the surfaces are now smooth. Or imagine pushing this box through an oily ground. It'll be easier to do that because the surfaces are smooth. So that means that the rougher the surface, the higher the friction. And the smoother the surface, the lower the friction. So by polishing it, you make the surfaces smooth, thus reducing the friction. Now, in conclusion, friction is a double-edged sword, which can be both useful and harmful. It can be both useful and harmful. But it is necessary for us to study about it in order to help us in designing efficient machines and also to solve real life problems. Because by understanding the principles of friction, we can be able to know what to do in order to overcome friction. Though we cannot really overcome it totally, but we can find a way to ensure that we reduce it drastically and thus solving our real life problems.